Alfonso Cahero, A Journey into Finance History, Chapter 56, European Debt Crisis 2010. In the early 21st century, Europe experienced a period of economic stability. The European Union, EU, was flourishing, and the adoption of the euro as a common currency symbolized unity and prosperity. But beneath this veneer of success, trouble was brewing. European countries, buoyed by the optimism of a unified continent and eager to compete on the global stage, embarked on ambitious spending sprees. Governments borrowed heavily to finance infrastructure projects, social programs, and other ventures, often beyond their means. The allure of easy credit and the promise of a brighter future blinded many to the risks of such reckless fiscal behavior. In the years leading up to 2010, warning signs of an impending crisis were evident. Greece, in particular, had been accumulating debt at an alarming rate. Despite efforts to conceal the true extent of its financial troubles, cracks began to appear in the facade of economic stability. Greece's budget deficit, previously underestimated, was revealed to be much larger than anticipated. This revelation sent shockwaves through the financial markets, triggering fears of a potential default. As investors panicked, they started to question the sustainability of the Eurozone and the stability of the common currency. The crisis reached a tipping point in early 2010 when Greece's fiscal woes came to a head. With its economy teetering on the brink of collapse, the Greek government was forced to confront the harsh reality of its unsustainable debt burden. Facing mounting pressure from creditors and international lenders, Greece found itself in a desperate struggle to avoid default. The stakes were high, with the future of the entire Eurozone hanging in the balance. As Greece's financial crisis deepened, the contagion spread rapidly across Europe. Investors, fearing a domino effect, began to lose confidence in other heavily indebted countries, such as Portugal, Ireland, Italy, and Spain. These nations, collectively known as the PIIGS, faced soaring borrowing costs and mounting pressure to address their own fiscal vulnerabilities. The crisis sent shockwaves through the global financial system, highlighting the interconnectedness of economies in an increasingly interdependent world. What began as a localized problem in Greece soon escalated into a full-blown sovereign debt crisis with far-reaching implications. The European Union and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, scrambled to contain the crisis, but their efforts proved insufficient to stem the tide of panic. Bailout packages were hastily arranged for Greece, followed by Ireland and Portugal, in a bid to stabilize the situation. However, these measures only served to exacerbate tensions within the Eurozone and fuel further uncertainty. As the crisis deepened, the very foundations of the Eurozone were called into question. Member states grappled with the dilemma of balancing national sovereignty with the need for collective action to address shared challenges. The unity and solidarity that once defined the European project were put to the test as countries struggled to find common ground in the face of adversity. In exchange for financial assistance, Greece and other troubled countries were compelled to implement harsh austerity measures. These measures, imposed as a condition of the bailout packages, included deep spending cuts, tax hikes, and structural reforms aimed at reducing budget deficits and restoring economic competitiveness. But the austerity policies proved deeply unpopular, igniting widespread public outrage and triggering social unrest across Europe. Citizens took to the streets to protest against government austerity measures, decrying the loss of jobs, cuts to public services, and worsening living standards. The divide between policymakers and the people they purported to represent widened, fueling discontent and eroding trust in political institutions. The economic crisis unleashed a wave of political turmoil across Europe as governments grappled with the fallout from the sovereign debt crisis. In Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, incumbent leaders were ousted from power, swept aside by a tide of public anger and frustration. New leaders rose to prominence, promising to challenge the status quo and chart a new course for their countries. But their task was daunting, as they inherited the monumental challenge of navigating their nations through the worst economic crisis in generations. The political landscape was in flux, with traditional political parties facing a crisis of legitimacy and populist movements gaining traction on both the left and the right. Amid the turmoil, the European Central Bank, ECB, emerged as a key player in the fight to stabilize the financial system. Recognizing the severity of the crisis, the ECB took unprecedented steps to shore up confidence and prevent a full-blown meltdown. One such measure was the implementation of a program to purchase government bonds in secondary markets, aimed at lowering borrowing costs for struggling countries and providing much-needed liquidity to banks. By acting as a lender of last resort, the ECB sought to restore stability to the Eurozone and prevent the crisis from spiraling out of control. As the crisis dragged on, calls grew louder for greater fiscal integration within the Eurozone. Many experts argued that a common currency without a common fiscal policy was inherently flawed and unsustainable in the long run. The lack of fiscal solidarity among Eurozone members had exacerbated the crisis, exposing deep fault lines within the monetary union. Without meaningful reforms to address these structural weaknesses, the Eurozone risked repeating the mistakes of the past and remaining vulnerable to future shocks. But achieving closer fiscal integration would require overcoming formidable political obstacles and entrenched national interests. The road to a fiscal union was paved with challenges, requiring consensus among member states and a willingness to cede sovereignty in pursuit of the common good. Behind the headlines and economic data lay the human cost of the sovereign debt crisis. Millions of Europeans found themselves caught in the crossfire, grappling with unemployment, poverty, and social upheaval. In Greece, once vibrant cities became ghost towns as businesses shuttered their doors and families struggled to make ends meet. Youth unemployment soared to unprecedented levels, leaving an entire generation without hope for the future. In Spain and Portugal, austerity measures inflicted similar hardships on ordinary citizens, exacerbating inequality and social injustice. The toll on mental health was equally devastating, as anxiety, depression, and despair became widespread in communities ravaged by economic hardship. Families were torn apart, friendships tested, and dreams shattered as the promise of a better life turned into a distant memory. The impact of the sovereign debt crisis extended far beyond the borders of Europe, reverberating across the global economy. Financial markets were roiled by uncertainty, as investors grappled with the implications of a potential Eurozone breakup. Emerging markets felt the sting of contagion as capital fled to safer havens in search of stability. Developing countries saw their export markets shrink and their currencies depreciate, exacerbating economic vulnerabilities and undermining efforts to achieve sustainable development. Even the United States, the world's largest economy, was not immune to the fallout from the crisis. The prospect of a Eurozone collapse sent shockwaves through Wall Street, triggering volatility in stock markets and raising fears of a double-dip recession. The sovereign debt crisis served as a wake-up call for policymakers and economists alike, exposing the fragility of the global financial system and the inadequacy of existing regulatory frameworks. It laid bare the dangers of excessive debt accumulation, unsustainable fiscal policies, and the lack of effective mechanisms for crisis management. One of the key lessons learned from the crisis was the importance of fiscal discipline and sound economic governance. Countries that had pursued prudent fiscal policies and maintained healthy debt levels proved more resilient in the face of adversity. The crisis underscored the need for greater transparency, accountability, and oversight in financial markets to prevent future crises. Moreover, the Eurozone crisis highlighted the inherent tensions between national sovereignty and supranational integration. While the euro was intended to promote economic convergence and political unity, it exposed deep divisions among member states and highlighted the challenges of forging a common identity in a diverse and heterogeneous union. In response to the crisis, policymakers embarked on a series of reforms aimed at strengthening the resilience of the Eurozone and addressing its structural vulnerabilities. Measures were introduced to enhance fiscal surveillance, improve economic coordination, and create a more robust framework for crisis resolution. Despite the immense challenges posed by the sovereign debt crisis, Europe eventually began to emerge from the depths of recession. Thanks to bold policy action, and concerted efforts to address the root causes of the crisis, the Eurozone stabilized, and confidence gradually returned to financial markets. Greece, Ireland, Portugal, and Spain implemented painful reforms to restore fiscal sustainability and improve competitiveness. Structural adjustments were made to labor markets, pension systems, and public administration, albeit amid widespread social opposition and unrest.